Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining the National Caucus and Center on Black Aging and the R.W. Turner Lab today as we present our webinar on Black male caregivers for dementia. Our presenter today is Dr. Robert W. Turner II. Dr. Robert W. Turner II is an assistant professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership with a secondary appointment in the Department of Neurology at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. He earned his PhD in medical sociology at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. He is the chair of the subcommittee on community engagement at the GW Institute on Brain Health and Dementia. Also holds a position as a research scientist in the Center on Health and Society at Duke University and is a faculty fellow at the Global Sport Institute at Arizona State University. After attending James Madison University on an athletic scholarship, Dr. Turner played football professionally in the now defunct United States Football League, the Canadian Football League, and briefly in the National Football League with the San Francisco 49ers. Dr. Turner is an active member of his local church and serves on the board of directors for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Washington, D.C. He is also the author of Not for Long, The Life and Career of the NFL Athlete, and a consultant for the LeBron James produced HBO documentary film, Student Athlete. Dr. Turner, it's a pleasure, and we thank you so kindly for joining us today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. I really greatly appreciate it, and I thank you for having me here today. This is really a great opportunity just to kind of share, and I'd love to learn from everybody in the audience as much as I can participate and kind of part some kinds of things that I've learned in the future and kind of in the work that I'm doing now and what we plan on continuing to do out of my lab at GW. So I really want to thank you. And as you can see, I'm at the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership there at George Washington University in the School of Medicine and Health Sciences. Can we get the next slides, please? And as you mentioned, Angela, I do have a background. I'm originally from New Jersey, and I went to James Madison University on a football scholarship, and that was well before graduate school. I was very fortunate enough to live a dream of being able to play professionally. As you mentioned, I played over 5 different seasons in 4 leagues. The Canadian Football League, got originally drafted by the Memphis Showboats, which if anybody who remembers, big football fan, I was in the same draft class with Reggie White, who went on to become a Hall of Famer, and I went on to have a cup of coffee in the NFL. But again, my medical training is in medical sociology, a PhD there, along with advanced training in neurocognitive aging, as well as conducting dementia research, particularly from what we call a mixed methodology and really culturally sensitive, trying to understand how, in my work in particular, how does sports concussions affect neurocognitive functioning later in life, but then also looking at Alzheimer's and dementia, and how that in particular impacts Black men who are caregivers. And so as you can see, my background, I'm the principal investigator for a project that was funded by the National Institute on Aging, which is the Black Men's Caregiver Study. And it's the first study of its kind that's really trying to understand the issues around Black men who provide care for informal, unpaid care for a loved one that they either live with full-time or that they are at least providing 10 hours a week in care support for that individual. And what we're looking at in particular is how it affects how providing care for a loved one affects their neurocognitive functioning, memory, and different executive function, that type of thing. But then also, is there a stress that is related to providing that care, and how does it affect you physiologically in terms of chronic stressors, and what does that do to your body biologically and physically? I'm also the principal investigator for what we have as a Black men's brain health study. I'll talk a little bit about that. And really, there's a Black men's brain health initiative where we run a national conference on a regular basis during the Super Bowl week, where we are partnered with the Alzheimer's Association as well as the NFL Alumni Association. Next slide, please. And so, as we talk about caregiving in particular, and as I said, I've really focused on Black men who provide care. What is it that we're looking for? What is it caregiving? And this is really kind of coming from definitions with the Alzheimer's Association, but it's a person that you love or you care for, and it's attending to that other person's needs and their well-being. And anyone familiar with Alzheimer's dementia, you know that there are issues around how you function with your activities of daily living. And what we're talking about with this is it includes, bathing and dressing, someone even taking care of their own medication, people being able to have mobility issues, walking up and down stairs. All of those things, all of a sudden, when you're functioning with a disease and it may attack different parts of you where you're not able to do that and you need help. And that's what caregiving is really at the core all about, helping someone who can no longer function independently. And then so you have what we call the activities of daily living, but then we also have the multiple, what we call instrumental activities of daily living. And that's more about things that, where your independence is coming from, paying your bills, making sure your cable is on, using transportation, those kinds of things. What happens when you lose that functioning? Those are all encompassed in what we think about in terms of being a caregiver or providing for someone that you love. Next slide, please. And so just going back off of that, looking at what are the kinds of things that we're talking about assisting people with. People, who have dementia and Alzheimer's issues, you can see kind of people who provide care for Alzheimer's and other dementia compared to just caring for other people who, as they get older and they have a little bit more issues. But, getting in and out of bed and getting in and out of chairs, that's something that lots of older adults have those issues with. But then getting dressed, as you can see, it's starting to be incrementally more people who have Alzheimer's and dementia. They have issues with that, getting dressed, or bathing and showering. I will share that my dad has dementia. He has Alzheimer's disease and is progressing towards dementia. And he has some issues when it comes to bathing and showering. What we do here in my family is that my dad is part of an adult daycare project. And so we make sure that he gets showered at that facility once a week, but those start to become a real issue. Feeding, you can see older people have about 20% of older people have problems, but you're looking at people who have other forms of dementia. About 33% people need that additional help with just eating, getting to and from the toilet. And then the big one is, of course, dealing with incontinence. That's something that, all these are tasks that caregivers are helping. Those are the big ones that we're helping people with. Another slide, please. And this is how one of the big questions is, how large of a scope is this? How impactful? How much of this is an issue in America? And as you can see there, in 2022, the Alzheimer's Association found that over 11 million Americans provide unpaid care to a loved one with Alzheimer's or Alzheimer's-related dementias. These caregivers, look at the amount of hours. This is just people who, when they get off of work and when they have to take off from work or whatever they're doing in their regular lives, they're donating towards providing care on a national level over 18 billion hours, which values at $340 billion of unpaid care that's coming specifically out of the community. And it would come as no surprise to you, I'm sure, that within the Black community, there's more of those unpaid hours are coming from our communities than they are from many other communities. 66% of caregivers live with the person who they're providing unpaid care for, and 41% of the caregivers have a household income of $50,000 or less. So we know the cost of healthcare. We know what healthcare providing care for an individual that has dementia. We know how expensive that is. But so there's a disproportionate burden that is being placed on people without any external help for people with incomes that are $50,000 or less. So it's the people who need maybe the most help financially are the ones that are more, I guess you would say, more challenged financially to make their dollars in the household go farther to provide care for their loved ones. Next slide, please. And again, this is what I was just talking about. Disadvantaged, marginalized populations are more vulnerable to be affected by Alzheimer's and dementia. Black Americans, this is something that's really important, obviously, to us here, but we're more than 2 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's or dementia than white Americans, but are less likely to receive a timely and accurate diagnosis. And just like with any other disease, being diagnosed early is the key to any type of interventions, any type of ways of making sure that you have the resources available to the individual and the caregiver. So if we're twice as likely and to have the disease, but much less likely to receive a timely diagnosis, then that really limits our treatment options. It limits the support that we can get from external resources from the city. It limits the types of conversations you wind up having once you do get a diagnosis. And then again, compared to white caregivers, Black caregivers are more likely to provide more than 40 hours of caregiving a week. And that question is, how do you do that if you are a working full-time adult? How do you provide that kind of care? How do you juggle that? So you can see this disease is while it doesn't discriminate, it impacts the Black community far greater than the white counterparts in many different issues. And so this is why it's really important. Advocacy is important, making sure that you have the resources and making sure that you have a game plan in place when and if it does show up in your household. Next slide, please. So the deterrence, in terms of what is it for Black male givers, right? Black male caregivers. What are some of the Black male caregivers talking about that are deterrent to providing care? But we do know that Black men provide care. But one of the things that are really important to Black men is about the stigma, right? And the barriers of discussing that's in the literature, cultural and gender expectations. Society, kind of their perspective of caregiving historically has been women. But we also know that within the community that there are lots of, I believe the numbers last that I looked is around 60% of all Black households are headed by a single parent. And so that means that there are going to be many Black men who need to be providing care for that person. It depends on lots of other issues that are going on within the family dynamics as who's providing that care. But men are being what we found that men are actually stepping up. The literature says there's about 2 million Black men that provide care of some type, unpaid care for a loved one, right? So we know that they're out there, but they're also fighting over some of these expectations, right? You have to learn how to function within that role. And then there's the lack of support, reluctance to use formal and informal support. What we're finding is starting to happen now that didn't happen even within 5 years ago, but having Black men who are providing care for someone, having support groups that are specifically for Black men to address and be able to speak to other Black men, to recognize that you're not the only one in your community, only one in your social networks that are providing these. Where do I turn to when I have certain feelings, right? When I'm not fulfilling my own expectation, when I'm not able to work and bring money in because I have to provide a care and support. Having that And knowing that those resources are out there, we have to first identify them, but then we've got to be willing to allow ourselves to go and utilize them. Because one of the things that all health experts will tell you is when you start to carry things by yourself and not take care of yourself and not be engaged in social networks, it can be detrimental to your own health, right? And this is where we want to break over that stigma, right? So, people who are caregiving and providing, with dementia, they face discrimination and challenges even within the healthcare system. And then there's thing that we don't like to talk about as men at all, right? The whole masculinity part, but the strain, one of the things that I've heard when I've been out into the field oftentimes is we don't like to use the word burden, because as a caregiver, you're not supposed to have stress. You're not supposed to have burden. It's an honor to be able to provide that care and support for a loved one. But what happens when you do feel that you're stressed? What happens when you do feel that you're burnt out? What happens when you feel like you need a break? Who do you talk to? How do you handle that? Or do you just internalize it because you're supposed to be strong and that's what you expect that everybody requires of you? Or even you look at your other role models and your males, like your father and your grandfather, and how they were strong and they were the strong silent type, but they kept everything inside of them. And then that stress and that strain was eating them alive. Next slide, please. Right. So just kind of, again, some of the things that we have learned from the literature, Black male caregivers as a group, that they feel like they are most likely to be burdened in their role. And this is one of the things I really want to emphasize and point out, that we've seen over and over through COVID. We've seen in all kinds of statistics. But if you look at the Black male health profile in America, you notice that we have the worst health profiles. We have a shorter lifespan. The literature says now, after COVID, I've heard the Black male lifespan is as low as 68 years old. It could be around 70 to 68. But Black men on average are living 6 years younger, shorter lives than Black women, right? So what happens if you're feeling that you're burnt out? What happens if you're feeling and you're stressed and you're not taking care of that? It's just going to be worse on your overall health, right? Black men feel 3.3 times more likely to experience financial burden and stress associated with that, right? So all of this comes down to, what are we doing to take care of ourselves, knowing that we are in these roles, knowing that we're feeling all of these things? Where do we turn to? Black caregivers are more often tasked with extra hours of caregiving responsibility, including helping with these activities of daily livings. All of these things put us at greater risk. Next slide, please. So where are the support, the help for the kind of resources that we need? Obviously, I work very, very closely with the Alzheimer's Association. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm the primary caregiver for my dad, who I had to relocate from Virginia to move here back to New Jersey, where I grew up. And I'm here, probably 3 weeks out of a month, making sure that I'm taking care of him. And when it first happened, when we lost my mom and I became a caregiver, I didn't know what to do. We were in crisis. And what I was recommended, I didn't realize this, but the Alzheimer's Association has a 24-hour line to help you. And it's really what we look for. And what I got out of this was they help you with every area of this, not just, can you tell me more about the disease, but where are the resources, both on a national level, on a local level, on a state level, insurance level? What are the things that your business, where you work at, where are all the resources? What are all of the issues that you might need? They provided for me what we would call kind of like a health coach, or, an elderly health care coach, to help me work through all of these different things. And so I would highly recommend that, these slides in my study will be available to everybody, but I want to make sure that that there is a lot of information out there, which is why, again, this organization today is providing this, is because what we've learned about Alzheimer's and dementia and these other types of things, no one literally can be alone. You can't stand as an island. If nothing else, it really does take a village. Like they talk about, to raise a child, it takes a village to really care for and provide the adequate and appropriate level of care for a loved one that is suffering with this disease as well. So make sure that you're not alone in trying to handle this, that you reach out and you know where those resources are. Please, next, please, next. Right. So one of the things that I've learned, right, it's really keeping a routine. I just took my dad to the doctor this morning. We got an excellent clean bill of health from the doctor, and the doctor mentioned to me and my dad, one of the things that has helped my dad the most is making sure that we have a routine, right? We get him up at the same time every morning. We make sure that he has his breakfast. He takes his medications. We try to keep as well of a really calm household as possible, so that way that there's not a lot of stress in the air or anything else. He knows when he gets up in the morning, we hand him his clothing, he goes and he does his bathing, he dresses himself, we eat at the same time. We really try to do as much as we possibly can. Now, that being said, recognizing one of the things that is really important when you're caring for someone that has, this disease, is that recognize that the disease, unlike many others, it progresses over time, and it's really hard to predict. If impossible, you don't know when people are going to progress from one phase to the next, which is, again, one of those reasons why it's really good to be able to make sure that you keep a regular routine, taking them, having regular checkups with the doctors, making sure that you are connecting with the Alzheimer's and others. So that way, when you start to see different things happening in terms of their behavior, that you report them back to the doctor, it can help you, what's important to report. And another thing that you might have thought, oh, it's really not that important, but it really helps, right? Help the person, especially in their early phases, if they're coming to grips with maybe they're having some memory loss. It's okay to write things down, right? It's okay to have a calendar on the wall so that everybody can look at it and see, to help people, get in that routinization. Plan activities. What I've learned with my dad, one of the things that I do, he loves going to the park. He loves being a fisherman. He loves taking walks. So we go out and try to do as much as that as we possibly can do on a daily basis. This summer, I've never done this before. When I moved back, I remembered my dad loved gardening. So we planted a vegetable gardener. So it gave me an opportunity to learn about planting vegetables and tending the garden, which I've never done before. But it was also a great opportunity for he and I to bond together, to talk about it. He doesn't remember how to do these things, but it really has engaged, and he loves the fact he's like, oh, there's a new tomato, it just turned red, let's go grab that one. So those are just kinds of the things that we do to really help him and to help me understand how to meet my dad where he is in his life, instead of trying to get him to recognize all the things around him. It's okay if he doesn't recognize them. He's happy where he is, so let's meet him where he is and keep him safe and secure, and that we're making sure that we're taking care of all of his needs. Next slide, please. All right, this is really important. Again, I'm not gonna go over all these because they're all in the slides, and you'll have them. But make it easy for your loved one when they're getting dressed. Don't make it difficult. If they're not at a place now where they can tie their shoes, then that's okay, right? You get them the shoes that they can slip on, slip off. Get them slippers around the house. Make sure that they have loose fitting clothes. Anything that helps their lives is really what I found is to be the key. And the other thing is that you want to be able to help that loved one maintain their independence as long as possible. So, tying shoes may be really difficult for them, and they may be embarrassed for that. And so therefore, let's just not have those kinds of shoes anymore. Let's make it such that they can slip on and they feel like they're very much in charge of everything. So those are really important. Other things, the shower chairs and those kinds of things, making sure that the meals, what I have found, as people get older, right? I've started working with a nutritionist, talking to the doctors about, meal preps, the type of meals, how do we adjust those meals, making sure that they're still tasty for them, but they're healthy for them, right? All of those things, helping to manage all of the different parts of their life. That's really important. But what I've found, networks, making sure social engagement, consistency, and really developing a great relationship with your parents or your loved one's doctor, communicating everything, learning as much as you possibly can. That helps you really meet a person where they are to take care of them. Next slide, please. All right. And then just kind of 5 for caregivers. And this is what I've learned for myself personally. Managing your own personal level of stress is really critical. And it's never truer when people say, you know, I remember when I was younger, people would say, take care of yourself. And I always thought that was, you know, cute, or, well, why would you say that? But it's so important. You can't take care of someone else unless you are taking care of yourself. What does that mean, right? Sometimes maybe you just need alone time. Sometimes maybe you just need a downtime. Sometimes you have to admit to yourself, you can't carry all of the burden. So, you know, there is things like respite care that you can, you know, hire someone. I know in DC, they provide respite care for you, making sure that you're available, whatever those resources that you're available to have, take care of them. Go out and find what those resources are. Maybe sometimes what you literally need to do, because you've been taking care of everybody else so long, is maybe all you need to do is go sit in the barbershop chair and make sure that you got respite care for an hour or 2, just to chop it up with all of the fellas, get your hair cut, laugh a little bit, hit the reset button, and then go back and take care of that person, right? Be realistic about what you can and what you can't do. If you can't do it all, don't try to do it all. Find where are the resources. Talk to the Alzheimer's Center. Talk to, you know, DC, where they have a level of a lot of care. Maybe your work provider. We're here at GW. We have this thing called Bright Horizons, where they provide additional support, so I can figure out where those resources are best for me. And then make sure you take that break. And I would say another thing that's not on here, but it's very hard to do, but really important, is make sure you get your proper sleep. I think that's really, really important for you. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, make sure you go get to see your doctor. I want to just deviate from here just a quick bit, because we always talk about doctors, and that's really important. But let's talk about oral care as well. Making sure, you know, I tell people all the time, it's 2 things. If 2 things are hurting, it's almost impossible for you to do anything. You have a toothache, it's really hard for you to concentrate on anything. All you want is that toothache to be gone. Or if you hurt your foot, right? Somebody step on your foot, you can't do anything. But I just want to say that make sure for your loved one and for yourself. With my dad, he's gotten to the point, his activities of daily living, he doesn't brush nearly as well as he used to. We've tried almost everything. He won't let anyone brush for him. We tried electrical brush. He doesn't like that too much. So he brushes maybe not nearly the 2 minutes at each time he's supposed to. He might only get 30 seconds in. So we do the mouthwashes and all those other things. But what we've decided to do in our house by working with our dentist is to make sure that my dad goes every 2 months, and we do teeth cleaning by the professional there. So that way, before it really cakes up and before it becomes a real problem, you know, we're helping as part of his healthcare, oral healthcare regimen, is ways to make sure that his teeth are clean, because what they've said is you don't want to get your dad to have gum disease, right? So just being on top of that for yourself as well as for the person that you're taking care of. Next slide, please. And so they asked me to put, kind of in here a slide about leaving a caregiver legacy. And so I just want to point out to you 2 people that are really important to me. Obviously, that's my dad. I put my arm around him, and he's my best friend. He is, it's just incredible to have this opportunity at this stage in my life to take care of my dad. People say, bless you for doing all of that. And Dad's really lucky to have you. But, I tell you what, I'm 61 years old, and Dad's been there for so many different phases in my life. And I'll tell you, for lots of people, seeing a loved one that has Alzheimer's or dementia and they're not the person that they used to be, it's overwhelming for some people. They can't handle it. Some people are afraid that they might get dementia and all these other things. But for me personally, it's been a real blessing to be in this phase in my dad's life as other phases, because he's still the same person that he used to be. He just doesn't function the same way he is, but he makes me laugh. He makes me smile. He loves to dance. he gets up every morning and says, I say, Dad, how's your day? He says, hey, I got both feet on the ground. It's a great day, right? So when I took him to the park a week ago, we sat there and he said he wanted to watch the ducks. And so we sat and we watched the birds, and we then had an opportunity. I know he loves to sing. So I got my phone out. We looked at YouTube and we sang the Bob Marley song, Three Little Birds. We had a wonderful time. And I said, that was a revelation for me to say, of all the different things that I could be doing with my life today, this is the best way to spend my life. I have the pleasure and the honor of spending this time with my dad to help him live the best days of his life and how much he enriches my life. So that's a legacy that I want to, and I just want to say that that's my grandmother in the other picture. My dad was the youngest of 9 children. And when I saw that my dad really started to take a downward spiral in his memory and so forth was when my dad lost 3 siblings within 2-year period, and it became his record. He realized he was the only one. And at that point, he started, all his memories were not about his wife, who we lost a year ago, and not about his kids, but my dad talks a lot about his mom, talks a lot about his brothers and sisters. That long-term memory is there. The short-term memory is gone, right? And I just remember my dad, he was a single dad for a long time, raising me, and I lived with my grandmother. And so they taught me what it's all about to honor your mother and your father. And it is a complete honor to know that my grandmother showed me what love was all about. And my dad, through my whole life, has always been there. And that's the legacy that drives me to take care of my dad, to give him the best care that I know how to give, because I was just very fortunate to be, raised by and supported in my life through people who just love me. And this is my way of playing it forward, I guess you could say. So next slide, please. Right. But current research, most caregiving research is primarily focused on white women. People of color, and particularly men of color, are not often included in dementia research. And that's the space that I kind of live in. And so including all people and all backgrounds is really, really important. And I want to just say really quickly, where medicine is moving, the greatest big advances that we're seeing in the future in medicine is starting to be around personalized care, personalized medicine. And if we're not involved with research, and if we're not involved with how monies get expended in what communities, if we're not advocating for those things, we're going to be falling farther behind. And so it's really important and that's really, if I leave you with anything today, is get involved with research. Let us understand particularly our own unique health profiles, so that way when we have interventions, when monies are being distributed, we're making sure that we are being supported in our own unique issues that we are facing as Black men that are providing care and receiving care. Next slide, please. And so I just wanted to, I'm going to move on through this because I want to just make sure that we have enough time to talk about my studies and research and answer lots of questions. But we're in the midst of closing out our Black men's caregiving research project. And what we've done here is we are looking for Black men who are over the age of 28, all the way up to 95 or whatever. We have 40 Black men right now. I think we have about 42 Black men who do not provide care, and we're needing about the last 13 Black men who do provide care, because it's supposed to be 40, 41 in each group. And we're trying to understand, how does caregiving impact the neurocognitive as well as the physiological stress process? How does providing a caregiver, how does it affect your overall health? And we're also trying to understand the health of Black men. This study is particularly just limited to Black men who are in the DMV area, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Really need your help to get involved. We thank the organization for this today, but this is the only study of its kind, and it's actually the only study that's ever been funded that looks specifically at caregiving and issues that Black men are addressing. Next slide, please. And just as I told you, the goal is 40 men. We have 41 that are recruited in that are non-caregivers. I think we're down to 13. really, anyone who's interested, I'll have my information here at the end. But once we get this, we really are going to be able to disseminate this information within the community, understand uniquely what's going on with Black men and how we can help them, provide care, how we can help understand what their unique, risk profiles are when it comes to their overall health and well-being. Next slide. Just a few quick other studies that I'm doing. As I mentioned earlier, we have a Black men's brain health directory, men who say, I want to learn more about research. I'm interested, but I don't know anything about research. So before I commit to getting into research, can you share with me, disseminate information and help me understand what does it mean to be in research? And then there's those other men that say, hey, listen, I know all about it. I feel comfortable. I want to get involved and I want to jump in. Last thing I'll mention here is that with the success of this caregiving project, the federal government through the National Institute of Health has just awarded me a $6.5 million grant to look at the overall health, not just of caregivers, but Black men who who are Black men within the community, as well as Black men that have played football. So we want to understand kind of all encompassing, all around brain health and how do Black men's brains age as the rest of their body ages across the life course. And this study is for 50 years and older. And you'll have the slides and you can reach out and find out more about that as well. Next slide, please. All right. And so with that, I am going to turn it over. It looks like we've got a little bit more than 20 minutes left. I'm going to open the floor up, but just wanted to let you know that I'm available. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have. And then there's the information about the study as well. So thank you very much and for giving me the time to kind of share a little bit of this information.
Hi, Julian.
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Turner. And I will, be facilitating a lot of the Q&A portion of the presentation. So first and foremost, thank you so much. I guess one of the questions that you touched on was talking about the need of families having a care plan. So can you elaborate on that a little bit more and maybe talk about how and where they should start in establishing care plans?
Sure. And I'll share it from my own family's personal experience. Unfortunately, we lost my mom a year ago. And prior to that, my mom had been sick for about a year. And so we had a caregiver that was taking care of her. She had kidney failure and some other issues. And my dad, he's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I think it's been about 10 years ago now. And so at that point, once we lost my mom and it was so much attention paid to her, we were in a crisis all of a sudden. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to turn. We didn't have a plan, but we did know that dad needed care. And, I, at the time, was living in Virginia, working at GW. One of my brothers living up in Rhode Island. Another brother is living out in Portland, Oregon. And my sister is living in Quantico, Virginia area. And they all have children. And I was the only one that didn't have a child. And so I have the flexibility in my job to be able to relocate. But I had I literally had nowhere. I didn't know where to turn. My dad was in an adult daycare facility, but there was so much about his care. And my parents were from kind of that old school where they didn't like to share a whole bunch. We were kids, right? So the kids are to be seen and not heard. So when it came to what my dad's health profile was, what medications he was on, all of this other stuff, I didn't know this and we didn't know this. We had a caregiver at the house. So what I had to do is I had to call the Alzheimer's Association and I was like, what's the first thing that I need to do? And they just kind of walked me through what that plan needed to be. I really wish that on my part, I would have known earlier because I didn't, you don't even know what you don't know. And you're in the middle of a very stressful situation. And then I had to move my whole life and all of this other stuff. We were very fortunate that we were able to retain the in-home healthcare worker that could shift the attention in helping my dad. So I tell that story to say that, it's kind of almost like a living will or something. You better have it in place, or you really have to have it in place before you need it, right? Because you don't even know all of the issues that you need to, get taken care of. Like, I knew that where my dad and mom got put their prescriptions, but I didn't know, my dad he's a Marine. And so some of his prescriptions were paid for through Medicare or Medicaid. Some of them were paid for his private insurance. And I didn't know where we went. All of those things I had to learn, like, on the spot, how to actually deal with those. So I really want to encourage people that, it's kind of one of those things. Plan your work and work your plan, right? So the best place to start, again, in my situation, we have Bright Horizons, where they provide elderly care support, but we also, and that's for free. But also, I'll tell you what, and I've worked with the people of the Alzheimer's Association, that's the local chapter in the DMV area. They will walk you right through all of this stuff.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And there is a question that was in the chat that I'll read. So the question reads, are you aware of any groups or programs to help Black male former dementia caregivers reestablish purpose and direction after what often is years of intense caregiving?
Oh man, you talk about an important question. And I have to say, unfortunately, I do not know of any, but I do know this, right? I know that I keep going because there are sprouting up around the country through the Alzheimer's Association. I was just invited to speak at one. There's a Black male caregivers group out of Los Angeles that are helping and supporting Black men who are providing care right now. I know that the local chapter here of the Alzheimer's Association asked me to help facilitate a Black male caregiver group doing this, kind of modeling after what's out in Los Angeles. But I think you're absolutely right. I think what you're talking about is, how do you deal with that transition? How do your identity and reestablishing yourself and all that? I haven't heard of any of those groups, but what I have heard is that there are some local churches around the area, particularly Black churches, that have Black men's ministries. And this is one of the topics that they are just slightly beginning to deal with. So that might be a place to start with. But I'd actually say that, we're in desperate need of something like this. And so, if someone wants to reach out to me that asks that question, I can get them hooked up with the Alzheimer's, and maybe together we say, okay, listen, this is something we need to either identify those resources that are in the community, or we figure out how we can get one started. So I don't want to just drop the question by dissatisfyingly say, I don't know of any, but I will say that if you're willing to reach out to me, my staff in our lab, we can start to do some of the research, and we can reach out to some of the professionals in the community, and maybe together, by working with the person who asked the question, we can figure out how to get something started if it's not out there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And before I pivot to another topic, I guess while we're on the same topic of help seeking and trying to kind of build the resources after you've taken care of and been in that caregiver role, what are some really good informal ways that maybe you have experienced to really get yourself to decompress after your own caregiving experiences, in the informal sense?
Well, there's been two main things for me, and I have to say, one of them is because of the literature. I mean, I'm a research scientist. That's what I do, and I started to understand how important your networks are to you. Social engagement is almost like a magic pill to your overall health, right? And so what I've learned is so very important is, instead of focusing on the things that you don't have, I focus on the things that I do have. And one of the things that I do have is I have a great support system. What my male friends and I have started to do is we just check in with each other on a regular basis, and we never get off the phone without telling each other that we love each other, right? That you're important, that you matter, right? We just basically stole a page from out of some of the sisters' books, right? They're always being touchy-feely. We said, hey, listen, there's no reason that we can't do the same thing, because we feel like we're alone, or sometimes when someone just told you that, hey man, I'm feeling this. And then when he does that, you're like, you know what? that's not a foreign feeling to me. That's something that's really important to me too. So that's one of the things that I have found to be the most critical is when sometimes when I feel like, man, I'm going through it. I'm alone. It just seems like magically one of my friends texts me, one of them calls me, one of them pops a message, on Twitter or something like that. Or I just say, hey, I can go out and reach one of them. And I have female friends that have done the same thing. I've gotten to the point where I've learned that I have female friends where I tell them I love them as well. And I'm really glad that they're in my life, right? I've just learned that I can't carry this by myself. So that's one of the most important things. The other thing is I realized for me, I'm a person, I love the beach, right? That really rejuvenates me. So I just recently with one of my brothers, we took a 4-day trip, found a cheap way to get down to Puerto Rico, found an Airbnb, and we just sat on the beach and we talked and we laughed and we joked and we made sure that, talked about our concerns, our fears and everything else. I said, okay, now now that I hit that reset button, I'm good for another month or 2 months. So whatever those things are, I just make sure that I prioritize them in my life. I could do a lot better, but I do make sure that I have those in my life.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I really do appreciate the personal insight, especially because you kind of subliminally touched on a topic that most African-American men don't really like to delve into in terms of masculinity and asking for help. And it kind of segues into our next question. So a question from Mike says, thank you and happy to find other researchers focused on male caregiving in terms of masculinity. On male caregiving in terms of masculinity, I recently heard the term John Henryism as an influence on why Black men don't ask for help in caregiving. Have you encountered this concept?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sherman James, who was at Duke at one point. I think he's emeritus now, but yes. So essentially, and we are all very familiar with John Henryism, especially as Black folks, but we're more familiar with it because of the men we've been raised by. I remember, essentially what it's saying is that, you never show a weakness, that, you can John Henryism, you all know the whole story where he outworked, the steam engine and worked himself to death, right? He just bottled everything up. And I remember, my grandfather being that strong, silent type, both of my grandfathers on both sides, right? And we are taught that that's what it is as a Black man in particular. You don't cry. You don't, this is one of the reasons why we think about, Black men, you got to go out and you got to support your family. You got to do everything. It's on you to carry all of that load. Don't show that weakness, right? And that's what partly kind of kills us, right? And one of the things we talk about, the other thing, a form of John Henryism, is that Black men, for lots of different reasons, some legitimate, some not really legitimate, but we don't go to the doctors, right? When I'm focus groups that I've asked Black men, why don't you go to the doctor? They told me for 2 reasons. One, because I always get bad news. Anytime I go to the doctor, all I do is get bad news. And the second one, it's really expensive. So why am I going to pay for getting bad news telling me there's something wrong? So what we turn to is we turn to the emergency room as our doctor. Well, at that point, your leg is about ready to fall off and there's nothing else that they can do about that, right? And so I did see this really kind of a funny thing, stand-up comedy with Bernie Mac. He was talking about when he was a kid, he was, be real strong and never let him see you cry. He goes, but shoot, now that I'm in my 40s, he got any little ache and pain, I go to the doctor for everything. Right. And so I just want to say that whole John Henryism, while it has helped us as a survival mechanism in America, it has certainly cost us in a very poor health outcomes. And so I just want to encourage everyone to make sure that, you are going to the doctor, you are getting checked up, you are not waiting until it's too late, and you're learning how to advocate for yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. One aspect that I really love that you touched on is in talking about John Henryism is kind of that the rough patch that most Black men experience when they are in the perspective and position of needing the help. And so I can tell you personally, my experience has been more recently when I was the primary caregiver for my grandfather, and he was in his 80s and primarily stubborn and did not want to accept the help. And so outside of the traditional kind of camaraderie that you may have in a familial sense. What are some ways that you may have delved into or found in research how we can approach that conversation in a meaningful way without it being perceived by the person who needs the care as disrespectful or trying to belittle them?
Well, that's not an easy question. And to be very honest, that's a difficult question. And I would say that question really depends on every individual. So let's think about my dad, right? My dad's 84 years old. My dad is a Marine. He's a former Marine. My dad is the most loving, caring person that you'll ever meet. Even to this day, his smile is infectious. People just fall in love with my dad. But my dad has a fiercely independent, streak in him. He's been used to, from a very young age, doing things on his own. Right. And anytime he perceives, like, what he does is he perceives when people are trying to help him and he's struggling, he perceives that as someone saying that he's inadequate. He's not man. He can't take care of himself anymore. So as an example, when we try to get him to take a shower or wash up, he's like, listen, I'm 84 years old. I've been doing this my whole life by myself. I don't need anybody to kind of tell me what to do. Well, and that can cut you pretty hard, as your son, where all you're trying to do is to try to love him, and you're, it's almost combative that way. Well, I've kind of learned through my dad's Alzheimer's is, in a way, that's not who he is. That's who the disease is. And we'll wait and be patient and introduce that idea, that concept at a time where it works for him. It might only take a minute or 2 minutes later. And so instead of fighting and us going mano mano, two men headed off at each other, trying to get him to do what I need him to do, that's okay. Listen, if it happens, an hour later, it's fine. If it happens 3 hours later, it's fine. It's just, how do we care for him in a way that he's able to receive it when he's able to receive it? Because it's not about me, it's about him, meeting him where he is.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. So you are obviously a working professional, as well as being a caregiver. What are some ways that you may help other caregivers who are employed? What are some ways that you would recommend that they bridge that conversation with their employer to highlight, the need for them to stay employed so they can maintain, their lifestyle and their household, obviously, but then also underscore the importance of them being present as a caregiver?
Well, I think, again, one of the things that we are seeing is more and more companies, like, again, GW, we're in the health space, so they understand, and they've put this together. They are allowing us to be a lot more flexible in terms of working remotely if possible. We have some resources there when you find yourself overburdened on any. So they allow us to have some, mental health professionals. We can get some counseling done. They allow those things. So sometimes just being able to talk through something, not even having practical things, but just say, hey, listen, I'm feeling burnt out. I'm feeling stressed. And then, so I would say that, one, what does your organization's find out? Sometimes maybe your best friend is to find out in HR, what are all the benefits? I had this benefit available to me at GW for 4 years, and I never knew about it until just recently, because I never needed it and I never looked to it until a friend of mine at work said, hey, you should call and see about this. And so all of a sudden I found that there are sources that are available that I didn't even know about. So the first place I would go to is start with HR within your company. Also talk to your direct supervisor, boss, or whatever, because one of the things that is true, what we talk about, and I've introduced this concept to lots of people, we're moving into what's called a silver tsunami, right? Right now, I think by 2030, there will be, for the first time in history in America, the number of adults who are 65 and older will equal, right, like kind of right across each other, will equal the amount of individuals who are 18 and under in our country. But by 2050, there will be more people over the age of 65 in this country than there are people under the age of 18.
Oh, wow.
So this issue around caregiving, and remember that number I told you, that $300 billion in that unpaid, this is going to be more and more and more common. And so we're going to have more people in the workplace who are kind of those Gen X's, millennials, or, you know, still moving forward before they're 65, this is going to become more and more and more common of people who are providing care. And so being able to learn how to advocate, talk to your employer, coming up with a plan that gives you the flexibility to take care is going to be crucial to the workforce in the future, but it's also going to be crucial for you to figure out ways to eliminate that stress as much as it possibly can. And then turning to respite care, there are professional organizations that you can pay for to someone who's a professional to sit with your loved one to give you a little bit of that extra time to go do what you need for your own personal health and well-being.
Okay, wonderful. There are a few more questions in the chat that I want to make sure that we get to. So the one question from Emily is, can previous caregivers join your study?
Yes, absolutely. You're more than welcome. We would love to have you in our study. As long as you provided care, we would love to have you in, and you fit those other criteria on the screen. Please just reach out. You can email, you can call directly. One of my lab assistants would love to have you be involved. But yes, we would really, as much as you can help us learn about our unique, specific needs as Black men and Black caregivers, we really would love to have you in our study.
Okay, wonderful. The next question I have, well, more of a comment. Please take your talk to the Gerontological Society of America annual meeting and maybe American Society on Aging, the largest two groups on aging professionals. Lots of us need to hear from you. So that's—
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. That support is really important to me. And I'd love to share this message with whomever is willing to listen to it.
All righty. And then I have a question from Kathy Wright, College of Nursing at Ohio State. As a nurse scientist, can you provide some tips or suggestions on how we can get our Black male caregivers to participate in research?
Yes, and that is what I'm spending a lot of my time with. I think the most important thing that we need to remember about Black men, but all of us in the Black community, and I think this is a really important question, and I'm going to tell you exactly why. Because of all the research that has been done historically in Alzheimer's disease, Black people only represent 5% of the population that's participated in Alzheimer's research, right? And of that 5%, 75% of those individuals are Black women. Black men only make up 25% of a total of 5%. So when you think about drugs that are designed and tested within the community, right, to see what the responses are, when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to understanding unique needs of certain populations, we're not there. And we really, really need to be there. And the number one reason when we go and we ask people if they've been in research or not, and we ask them why they've never been in research, and their number one answer is, no one's ever asked us, right? And so that's the number one thing. The number one thing to do, from my perspective, is you have to get out and you have to make the ask right up front. But then you also have to be sensitive and understand try to identify what are those barriers. One, again, masculinity when it comes to men saying that, hey, listen, I don't want to hear bad news, right? Men saying that they've never really been involved with it, right? Or I need a purpose. What's in it for me? I've had a Black man say to me, he said, listen, and this is true. He was like, listen, I'm going to be in your study because you pay up to $125 for that study. Don't come to me and ask me to get in a study for $25. He goes, but at least $125, I can pay my daughter's cell phone bill for that month, right? So I think the number one thing to do to get anyone involved is meet them where they are. What are the issues that they are particularly interested in? Every community is a little bit different. Black men in DC might be different than Black men down in Atlanta, might be different than Black men up in New York City. So let's find out what's important to them. How do we meet them where they are? Let's make the ask and get them involved. So those are the things that I think are really important. And we have to understand that, right? It's unlike survey data, unlike epidemiologists, just give me a data set and I can make that, run, I can sing. When you're doing community-based research, You have to be in the community, you have to be part of the community, you have to live in that community to build, those relationships that it takes to get people to get involved. And that's really what we do at the R.W. Turner Lab and the research that I do.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. The comments are definitely blowing up from, just thanking you for giving such a meaningful and excellent presentation. And even, from even our Director of Employment Services, as a female caregiver, never thinking about the experiences of the male caregiver and how this presentation has enlightened her personally, as well as so many other people. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the important work that you do, not only for our community, but for those who are caregiving for whether it be parents, grandparents, or even a brother or a sister. So we really appreciate everything that you're doing, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, I just want to say thank you. And one last point that I wanted to make was about the John Henryism that I think is really important, and about Black men keeping strong and everything. One of the reasons that I think it was so important for the country and why it touched so many of us Black people when we heard George Floyd scream out and say, "Mama," right? He was showing that, breaking down all of these barriers and showing the person that you turn to. And I think what's really important here is to understand, Black men's health also means Black women's health. It means us as a Black community's health, right? Because a lot of times Black women are helping manage us as Black men, manage their own health. And that vulnerability, right, that we saw in George Floyd helped us understand that we are all in this thing together, right? And so I just wanted to say, let's help us Black men, me included, when we get stuck on that whole masculinity piece sometime, it's to our own detriment. We've learned how to use it to survive, but we need each other to make it through, to have stronger and healthier communities.
Absolutely. Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Turner, for an outstanding, spirited, and informative presentation and webinar. We truly appreciate all that you do, and thank you so much again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. We truly appreciate all of those who have attended. You all have a great rest of the day.